The last time Alabama entered the Iron Bowl with 2 losses was way back in 2010, and it was an all-timer with Cam Newton leading Auburn back from 24 down on their way to a national title. That's also the last time Auburn won in Tuscaloosa, and they've fired 3 head coaches since. Gene Chizik, Gus Malzahn, and now Brian Harsin, who was let go after a 3-5 start this season. Former Tiger great Cadillac Williams was named interim head coach, thought of only as a placeholder. But who knows what could change if he leads the Tigers to a win over the Tide.
We are going to play football, Auburn football. And whether that's Dallas Cowboys, University of Alabama, the great Nick Saban, man, these kids not going to blink. We not blinking.
Interim, inexperienced coach on one side and the greatest of all time on the other. Nick Saban won his first national title when Cadillac was starring in the Auburn backfield. Saban has won 6 more with Alabama, but after 15 years, there's now some uncertainty about whether the dynasty and the dominance might be coming to an end. Saban is under contract through 2030, but he'll be losing 2 of the top players in college football. Bryce Young and Will Anderson playing their final game at Bryant-Denny Stadium, and perhaps their final college game period, with opt-outs looming for a likely non-playoff bowl game.
This is one of the biggest ones, and it means a lot to a lot of people in our state. It means a lot to us, our players, and our fans, and we're going to do the best job we can to get ready for this game.
It might not have SEC or playoff implications, but it's still the Iron Bowl, and it's on CBS.
There may not be conference or national titles on the line in this game, but don't let that fool you. There is always something at stake in the Iron Bowl. One of the most heated rivalries in all of sports, Alabama and Auburn kick off on the SEC CBS Game of the Week. Let's welcome in our experts on this matchup now, Nathan King and Travis Reier. Nathan, Auburn fans, we're looking ahead to basketball season in September. Then Cadillac Williams comes in, instills some fight into this team, and the fans come back with it. So what does this edition of the Iron Bowl mean to War Eagle Nation?
Yeah, I mean, we had several fans that at least I talked to, people posting on our board, on Twitter, all that kind of stuff, saying that, like you mentioned, they were ready for basketball season. A lot of them said that, the Texas A&M game a few weeks ago, which was Cadillac's first home game as the interim coach, a lot of them weren't planning on coming to that game, but that's what happens when you hand the keys over to an icon of the program, one of the most beloved figures in program history. And heck, he's got a winning record now as Auburn's interim coach. Of course, they beat a bad Texas A&M team at home, and then they beat one of the better Group of 5 teams in the country in Western Kentucky 41-7. And so he's now 2-1 as Auburn's interim coach. Yeah, this Iron Bowl, obviously, Cadillac Williams is someone who understands the importance of it, and he's going to make sure Auburn's players understand the importance of it. Of course, if you wanted to look at it quite literally, there is a bowl bid on the line for Auburn in this game. Of course, that would take a massive upset. They're massive underdogs here. I would just expect more of the same of what we've seen from Cadillac and these players over the past few weeks, which is, there was such a cloud of uncertainty hanging over them when Brian Harsin was around. And now they just get to play a lot looser. And we've seen that, for the better over the past few weeks, even in a loss to Mississippi State. They were just playing with a lot more energy and a lot more fight than you had seen out of a team that, they're not arrogant. They understood their coach was probably toast. And so once you make that move, I think they've been a good case study for why, when there's an issue and you feel like you need to fire a coach, you need to just go ahead and do it. Because look at what's happened ever since. The Auburn fans have really been a lot more energized. So I think they're looking forward to this game a lot more than they would have if Brian Harsin was still the coach.
Yeah, you can see the pride returning to the Plains. Speaking of pride, Travis, the standard for Alabama every season is national championship or bust. But now former players have had to visit Tuscaloosa this season to remind the current players of that. So how might an Iron Bowl win kind of salvage the season for the Tide here?
Well, it's really all that's left on the table for this team, Grace, when you consider the disappointments and the close losses to a rival like Tennessee and another rival like LSU. There's not a championship really available to this team, and that's one of the rare times when we've been able to say that about a Nick Saban team since 2007. So this is a team, it'll be interesting. They were not inspired by any means in the performance against Austin P on Saturday. You understand some of that because they had spent the previous 2 weeks on the road. It was an FCS opponent, but they're going to have a lot more energy and juice. Going to have to be able to match really Cadillac Williams. You watch him on the sidelines of these Auburn games, and he's the epitome of energy. And I think it's done a big favor to that Auburn program. And like Nathan said, getting rid of Brian Harsin and injecting that energy into the program with Cadillac Williams. So, for Alabama, I think it's all about mindset going into this game. You would think with it being an Iron Bowl, that wouldn't be much of an issue. But again, this is a team that's got to show that it's willing to go above and beyond, not just do what's required, because Auburn is coming in with some momentum.
All right, let's get into the X's and O's a little bit here. Auburn running backs Tank Bigsby and Jarquez Hunter have each had back-to-back games of 100-plus rushing yards. Nathan, what kind of challenge will they face against a Bama run defense that ranks among the best in the country?
Yeah, well, the thing is, there's still a lot of challenges for Auburn's rushing attack at the moment. Like you mentioned, they both went for 100 yards against Texas A&M. That was the first time a pair of Auburn running backs had gone over the century mark against an SEC opponent since 2009. And then obviously they didn't play an SEC opponent the next week, but they still did it in back-to-back weeks. Actually, since Cadillac Williams took over, Auburn has 779 rushing yards through those 3 games. Of course, that's better than 250 yards average there against 3 pretty decent teams. But their run blocking has still had a lot of issues. They have 2 of the more talented backs in the SEC, and mainly Tank Bigsby is able to make up for that. He's able to offset a lot of the issues they've seen this season. It's just been, it's been such an inconsistent offensive line. Even against Western Kentucky, Cadillac Williams told us after the game, he had to make sure guys knew that they were going to be hit. He almost had to prepare them for that first tackler to come in. They're down toward the bottom of the SEC in tackles for loss allowed even in the past few weeks. So these big performances from Tank Bigsby and Jarquez Hunter have almost been in spite of some inconsistencies up front. Big challenges. I mean, you look at a guy like a Will Anderson. I was during the game was talking about how many tackles for loss he might have when I think Auburn had allowed 6 TFLs in the first half against Western Kentucky. So it's going to be a big challenge for them, and it's probably going to require more individual efforts from Tank Bigsby and Jarquez Hunter.
Yeah, the numbers look good for this Alabama defense against the run, but when you look at their 2 losses on the season, they gave up 182 yards on the ground to Tennessee and then gave up 185 to LSU in Baton Rouge. And similar to LSU, I think Robbie Ashford presents some challenges to this Alabama defense as a quarterback who can get it done with his legs. Hunter and Bigsby obviously are going to be the focus, but I believe that Ashford's also had a 100-yard rushing performance here since Cadillac Williams took over as the head coach. So it's an Alabama defense that's very capable in the front 7. There is certainly star power, as we just heard, with Will Anderson, Henry To'oTo'o. But I think Alabama, as much as anything, is probably going to try to man up on the outside with its corners and force Ashford to do more than just run the football with those backs. Alabama did a good job last season on the Plains against both Bigsby and Hunter, holding that duo to under 75 combined rushing yards. I think DeMarco Hellams, the safety who leads Alabama in tackles, is also a key piece in this mix. And so that's where it'll sit for Alabama when going against this Auburn run game on Saturday.
Well, Travis, some of the things you talk about stopping Robbie Ashford kind of sounds similar to how teams are looking at Bryce Young. He, of course, never runs out of Houdini acts, it seems. He's been the sole difference in several close wins for Alabama. But a few teams, LSU, they learned to neutralize him, having a spy on him. So, Travis, how do you expect him to match up against the Tigers defense?
Yeah, it was a house of horrors for Bryce down at Jordan-Hare Stadium a year ago. He was sacked 7 times in that game. So you have concerns about protection first and foremost. Tyler Steen, the starting left tackle for Alabama, went out of the Austin P game last Saturday with a twisted ankle. We'll see how he continues to progress throughout the week and how he is ready to go by game time on Saturday. But so you have a concern there. Amari Kite could come into that mix at the offensive tackle position, a career reserve. But you're right. When it comes down to carrying not only this offense, but this team in general, Bryce has continued to be able to do that. And this time around, he's done it with some inexperienced wide receivers. And I think you've seen some trust issues crop up. Even 11 games into the season, you have some routes and some plays where it doesn't look like Bryce and his receivers are still on the same page. And a year ago, you didn't have those concerns going into this game because he had John Mechie out there on the outside to go along with Jamison Williams. That's where you have concerns if you're Alabama, because the run game has been hit and miss. If Auburn's able to put this entirely on Bryce, he's capable of the heroics, but consistency in the passing game hasn't been what Alabama would like.
Yeah, at the end of the day, a lot of those same defensive linemen that made life so hard on Bryce Young last season, they're still at Auburn, and guys like Derek Hall and Colby Wooden are having even better seasons right now. That being said, I can't necessarily see them replicating that performance that they had in last year's Iron Bowl, where, like you mentioned, they held Bryce Young, they held Alabama scoreless for 3 quarters. You look at this Auburn defense, and over the course of the season, the pass defense really hasn't been the issue. They've struggled in their run defense. They've struggled at linebacker. They have a very thin defensive line. So if Alabama's able to get things going with a guy like Jahmyr Gibbs, you might not have to rely on Bryce Young and these inexperienced receivers too much. But over the past few weeks, especially, this has been a secondary that's performed with a lot of confidence. You're talking about their most recent game against Western Kentucky. Of course, that's a team came in number 5 nationally in passing offense. Everybody knows what Western Kentucky likes to do. They threw the ball the 8th most out of anybody in college football entering the game. Auburn held them to their lowest completion percentage of the season, a season high 10 pass breakups in the game. That's the most for Auburn's DBs in 3 seasons. And then they had multiple interceptions in a game for the first time this season. So confidence, like we've been talking about throughout the show for Auburn, is going to be high in that regard. It's one of several areas where they feel like they're playing better over the past few weeks. But obviously, when you mention a guy like Bryce Young, regardless of who he has to throw the ball to, it's going to be difficult for them in that matchup. But the DBs and the pass rush, they say it all year long. They've said it to us every time we talk. They have a meeting on the field before the game. Some of the senior leaders in the secondary and some of the senior leaders up front saying pass rush and pass defense work together. And so if they can get those things going at the same time, they might have a decent chance. Because again, besides Roger McCreary, who was their number 1 cornerback last year, who actually got beat by John Mechie on that game-winning 2-point conversion, pretty much everyone else who had that standout defensive performance against Bryce Young, pretty much everyone else is still on the roster this season.
All right, great stuff, guys. Thanks for your time. And for more coverage on these teams and the Iron Bowl, check out Bama Online and Auburn Undercover.